Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Ultra in Conversation. And today I'm conversing with the colourful Ed of Murdered by Crayons. Hello, Ed, and a warm welcome to you.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Not at all. Good to have you here. First of all, I have to ask you, why do you have the name Murdered by Crayons?
I don't actually remember how I originally came up with it, but I was having a conversation with my wife, and I was going back and forth with some of the fans who I was just having to explain some really basic things to them about, legal process, etc. And she said, why don't you just get some crayons out and, explain it to them that way, and you can kind of murder them by crayons. So I was like, yeah, that actually kind of fits with the name, so I'm keeping it. So
well, makes sense. So yeah. Mrs. Ed came up with it. Well, good for her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I came across your work both in terms of on YouTube and on X because you talk and write about Andrew Tate. Now, when and how did Andrew Tate first come up on your radar, Ed?
Andrew Tate first came on my radar during the pandemic. It was a weird time for everyone. Depending on where you are or where you were in the world at that time, you were probably locked in your house for at least some period of time. And we were sitting at the dinner table one night, and my wife was speaking to one of my sons, and he said something along the lines of, "I'm not listening to women anymore because women are stupid." And you can imagine, if you're listening to this, or if you're as a father or a mother, how that goes over at the dinner table. And I said, where did you hear this? Where is this coming from? Because it was unlike anything that he'd said before. And he started showing me. He showed me what he'd been looking at on TikTok at the time. He started showing me Andrew Tate videos. And a lot of the videos were just full of misogyny at that time. So I partially blame myself for not being more attentive to the content that he was consuming on the internet at that time.
How old is your son?
I'd rather not get into the specifics of age, but he's young. Sure. He's my youngest son's under 15.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I try to leave them out of the conversation as much as possible and generalize, because a lot of Andrew Tate fans they've tried to find the victims in the cases. They've tried to hunt people down. I get death threats sent to me. So I try to generalize things. So it turned into a teaching moment for me to explain to my son the dangers of social media, the dangers of influencers, etc. And it opened a whole can of worms. And in the end, it worked out for the best, because he learned something, I learned something, and now he has access to the same legal documents that we get from Romania. So when I get a document, I sit down with him and explain to him, okay, this is what he says online, this is what he really says, this is what he's being accused of, this is the law behind that. So in the end, it worked out for the best. But it started with that, and then he ended up getting canceled on social media and getting raided and getting arrested, and everything just kind of snowballed. And the more that happened, the more his interest grew, and the more my interest grew in what he was being attracted to. And I ended up getting invited into a group on X, and they were researching the case, and they were getting documents from Romania through the Freedom of Information Act in Romania. And I don't know, it just something that snowballed out of control, really. And my account, as luck would have it, ended up getting a lot of attention from sharing some of those documents and explaining a lot of the procedure that's happening. And here we are.
Okay, so the initial driver was educating your son and protecting his interests in the light of what he was being exposed to. And it'd be fair to say that once you went down the rabbit hole, it became rather all-consuming because of the content and the fluid nature of what's going on with him. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair. This whole thing, it's taken a life of its own. It started with my son. I have an older son as well, and I kind of looped him in on all of this. But it started with my youngest son. But as this evolved, I started having victims of sexual assault and victims of human trafficking reaching out to me and thanking me for exposing this and bringing attention to it. And it just took a life of its own. It was completely unplanned. I'm not profiting from this. None of my accounts are monetized. I have no desire to make money off of this. I'm just trying to share information. And I also want to be very clear moving forward that I'm not trying to prove anyone's guilt. I'm trying to raise awareness and share information that I have that's come from many of the actual case files. Ultimately, a judge is going to decide, or judges will decide their fate. And of course, everything moving forward is alleged. They have denied everything. So I just want to state that before moving forward.
Sure. So you see it as you want to expose the information to a wider audience, if anything, perhaps the other side of the coin, because Andrew Tate naturally comments upon his version of events, and you're looking to provide some balance to that?
Yeah, balance is needed because the story that they're telling the public does not carry any truth whatsoever. They're telling the public they have been charged with human trafficking because they have helped friends go viral on TikTok. The reality is they've been charged with human trafficking because they allegedly trafficked multiple women to exploit them in pornography, specifically OnlyFans. One victim was for webcam. And they used TikTok as a method to break in new girls and to use it as a traffic source. So they would have these girls go live on TikTok and try to find customers who were interested in them. And they created a funnel system where they would then send interested customers to Instagram. And then when they got to Instagram, they would have a link out to their OnlyFans account. So it was a trafficking system. So because TikTok was involved, the Tates grabbed onto that and said, we're being charged for helping friends go viral on TikTok. So the narrative that they've put out to the world is completely false. So myself and the group, we're just trying to share information so people who are interested in them, fans who might be interested in these guys who think, they might be getting set up, etc. Like, people should know the truth. Parents should know the truth. If you have a child, if you have a son, you have a daughter. If you have a daughter who's dating a young man, you need to find out if that young man is being influenced to some degree by the Tate brothers, and if that influence is negative or positive. If you have a young son, you need the same thing. Is he being influenced by the Tate brothers, either negatively or positively? And if it's negatively, you need to have a talk with him. So a lot of the stuff we do is for the parents and for the fans.
Okay. Christine Ember, she wrote Rethinking Sex, A Provocation, and she's a Washington Post opinion writer. And she wrote an essay recently which was stated, "Men are lost, here's a map out of the wilderness." And she was involved in a podcast a little while after that, and she commented as follows: "And then they, young men, were missing role models, really missing role models. And this was the thing that I found most alarming. Many of them said they didn't necessarily have father figures in their lives, or men that they really looked up to, or that the adults in their lives felt nervous about prescribing any particular model of masculinity, and just said, well, go be a good person, which wasn't enough instruction for them. So they were turning to these influencers like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, who were providing, if not a good path, at least a very clear path." Now, in light of that observation, Ed, do you see Andrew Tate as the problem or a symptom of a bigger problem?
A symptom of a bigger problem.
Which is?
I agree with what she said. I wouldn't change anything about what she said. And a lot of the young men that I've had private conversations with online who have reached out and said, thank you for sharing this, I wasn't aware, etc. A lot of them do not have positive male role models, and they are struggling to figure out their place in the world. They're trying to figure out what masculinity means in today's confusing world. So I agree with every word that she said.
Okay. Now, I mentioned there Jordan Peterson, who's often been an advocate for young men, albeit in a different way to that of Tate. And in his book, 12 Rules for Life, he stated that suffering is built into the structure of being. And although it can be unbearable, people have a choice either to withdraw, which is a suicidal gesture, or to face and transcend it. What would you say to the argument that Tate's offering the same message to young men, which is basically transcend suffering through what he advocates?
I believe there's truth to that. And I need to be very clear when I mention Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate. I believe two things can be true at the same time. I believe that some of the messages that they put out there are positive.
Yeah.
Start a business, go to the gym, take care of yourself, take responsibility for your actions, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Overcome whatever situation that you've been put in. I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they put out a lot of misogyny. Unfortunately, they sold courses where they taught men how to exploit women in pornography. Unfortunately, they had private paid groups where they would workshop on how they could exploit women in pornography. But I believe two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Certainly.
And I want to add one more thing. The message that you're seeing from the Tate brothers now, it's all positive. And that's, people are circling the wagons around them and say, oh, they've changed and they're putting out all this positivity now and they're doing all the charity work. They were raided in April of 2022. That was when the first raid happened.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, DCOT, who is Romania's version essentially of the FBI, they're involved for, drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorism, etc. They believed at that time that they raided a human trafficking operation. One of the accomplices who was charged with the Tate brothers is an ex-police officer in Romania. She was caught after that raid illegally accessing, through the help of another police officer, the database where they could keep tabs of the investigation to see everything that was happening. So the Tate brothers that you see and hear after the 2022 April raid up until current, I would wager that this is part of a brand cleanup, a salvaging, because they're going to have to stand in front of multiple judges around the world and try to convince those judges and possibly juries that they have changed. So pre-April 2022, their message was drastically different. Once they found out they were being investigated for human trafficking and rape, they changed their message. They started doing a lot of public charity work. They created a new brand just for charity work. They started doing all of the things that you would expect them to do once they realized that eventually they were going to have to pay the piper.
I understand. Now, we've all seen the way that Andrew Tate presents himself, speaking very quickly, these pieces to camera, often quite a knee-jerk reaction to some of the things that are being stated about him and the progress of investigations, etc. For instance, just recently, when there was the court case in the United Kingdom about tax evasion, he immediately appeared and commented about that. It's very much this, I'm an alpha male, I'm built different, as he often says, with a bit of chest thumping going on. Do you think what he presents is an act, or do you think this is truly how he is?
I think there are a couple of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, in the documents that we have obtained from Romania, one of their defenses that they were telling the judges is that it's all an act. Everything online is an act. And they were saying this because a lot of his course content where he was teaching how to essentially exploit women into pornography, and a lot of the videos online where he was talking, misogyny, and he was explaining his methods of how he would recruit women and exploit them, etc. They were saying, oh, that's an act. That's all an act. And the judge rejected, every time they brought that up, the judge rejected that claim as unfounded because the judge actually saw evidence that the judge realized that this is how this person lives in real life. The evidence that we have shows that this is how he actually conducts his life off cam. Now, there's an argument to be had that the things that he's saying now to try to defend himself and protect his brand, that would be an act, right?
Yes.
The lies about what's happening about his case. Of course, he has to, he has a multi-million-dollar brand. He has to protect that. He has to have the money. He has to keep money flowing in. He has an online school. The Real World is what it's called. He has a paid group called the War Room. I believe they've raised the price to $8,000 to join that now. So he has to have money coming in. And you mentioned the tax evasion. One of the things he did when news came out of the tax evasion case, or the tax evasion trial that was coming up, is he spun that into, well, Romania was losing the human trafficking case. The human trafficking case is completely falling apart. So they had no choice but to try to get me on tax evasion.
Yeah.
But that that isn't what happened at all. The judge ordered the trial in Romania. The judge approved 100% of the evidence to move to trial and rejected 100% of his claims as unfounded. The only reason they're not in trial now is because Tate appealed the decision to go to trial. So now it has to go to the Court of Appeal to review all of his arguments. But the tax evasion case has nothing to do with the Romanian case. But those are the spins, right? Those are the spins. Like, this is falling apart, therefore they're trying to hit me with something else. So when he does stuff like that, it's brand protection is what it is.
Okay, so let's take that example of, I'm telling you that the Romanian case is falling apart. They can't get me on that, so this is why they've now moved to tax evasion. You see it as brand preservation. Do you think, looking at that as an example and the other instances, what do you think is actually driving Tate's behavior?
Narcissism, greed.
So you're on board with the fact that it's narcissism that's behind what he does?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably more equipped to answer that than I am in terms of narcissism. But yeah, I mean, we've seen this before. Right. We've seen, people love to smear victims. We see people love to say that they're innocent. Prisons are full of convicted people who claim that they did not commit the crimes.
Yes.
Well,
with Tate, he is a narcissist, and his behavior clearly demonstrates that. He doesn't operate with any real veneer. He calls it as he sees it. For instance, that's why we've seen in the past tweets where he boasts about hitting women. And yes. I think, I know you've highlighted it on X yourself. I think it was back in 2016. It's since been deleted. That he wrote, "I love hitting women. I don't know what it is about it, but it turns me on," or words to that effect. So that errant boast, which most people would think to themselves, well, that's an unpleasant and reprehensible thing to state. He just puts it out there. And for him, his behavior is all driven by his narcissism, whereby he needs to pursue what's known as the prime aims. So this means that he doesn't know what he is. But his subconscious narcissism causes him to have to control people. It causes him to have to draw what I call fuel from them, get a reaction, because it makes him feel powerful. It causes him to take traits from other people and bolt them onto his construct, and it causes him to get residual benefits. For instance, having a lot of sex, having flash cars, earning a lot of money. So his narcissism, if you like, is this app, this background app, that pursues those four things, not necessarily all of the time in relation to, say, character traits and residual benefits, but whenever he's dealing with somebody else, he has to have this control. Now, he doesn't sit there and think, oh, I need to control what's being said about me. But rather, his narcissism tells him, they're lying about you, Andrew. So you now need to go and make a video saying the Romanian case is falling apart. And that's why they're targeting me with tax evasion, because, it's the Matrix and they're after me. This is the paranoia that his narcissism generates to make him believe that he is so special, that he's being singled out. And rather than see it as it is, which is the Romanian case remains on foot, it's still going to trial, it hasn't collapsed, he sees it through a distortion field, and he actually believes this. He doesn't stand there and think, I know the Romanian case is still going on, but I'll say it's collapsing because that sounds good. He actually believes in that moment that means it's collapsing. He actually believes, they're coming after me for tax evasion because they can't get me in Romania. And then his narcissism compels him to brag about that in order to assert control over his audience, who all those that follow him respond by saying, yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew, we're backing you. So that gives him a sense of control, and they provide him with fuel. And it also nullifies the threat to control posed by the tax evasion case, because there are people who are saying, you're right, Andrew, what you say is correct. They're just out to get you. There's no substance in all of this. And everything that he's doing is being, when it comes to dealing with other people, is driven by this narcissism. He has no emotional empathy for anybody. So when he deals with women, his narcissism simply says they are an object which is there to be used by you. You can treat them how you deem appropriate. And what he then does is articulate that as his view of life, so that young men hear this mantra that's issued by him, which is, as you rightly acknowledged earlier on, some of the things that he say are fair enough in terms of improve yourself, get down the gym, etc. But his absence of emotional empathy, his lack of boundary recognition, his grandiosity, his need to boast, all parts of his narcissism causes him to have to say, well, you know, women belong in the kitchen and treat them like whores, and it's good to hit women, etc. That's all driven by his narcissism. So understanding that, you know, the fact he's paid no tax or claims to have or made that claim, that's part of his grandiosity. You can't get me. I'm the amazing Andrew Tate. Tax is for losers. I think he was driving along, wasn't he, basically saying that you're a dork if you pay tax. So he doesn't, because he's Superman. And then, of course, the problem he has, which is the case for many narcissists, is that with that wild boast that he made X number of months ago, it comes back and bites him on the backside later as a barrister stands up in court in the United Kingdom and says, here's a segment of video of Mr. Tate claiming he doesn't pay tax. And that's why so many narcissists like him get caught out.
That's fascinating. To go back to something that you said earlier on, so you believe that when he says, all right, so just let me paint a picture here so you can kind of maybe come back and explain this deeper.
Certainly.
So they're heading to trial in Romania for human trafficking, and forming an organized criminal group. And Andrew has an additional charge of rape in Romania. There's a second larger case being built in Romania for more human trafficking, trafficking in minors, money laundering, bribery and corruption offenses, and influencing statements, which is essentially witness tampering. He got caught on recorded jail calls trying to intimidating two of their victims into changing their statement. There's a UK case who's already sought extradition, and Romania agreed once Romania's criminal prosecution is concluded, they're to be extradited to the UK to stand trial, and this is for both brothers, for more human trafficking and rape. And there's a civil case in the UK where 4 women are alleging that Andrew Tate raped them. So what you're saying is, due to his narcissism, if I understood you correctly, when he says they're just hitting me with some more bullshit charges because the one's falling apart, you think he really believes that?
He does.
Wow.
The reason being, I often provide this analogy because it's often quite difficult for people to get their head around that concept that someone can really believe that. And it's not questioning anybody's intelligence. It's just such an alien concept, because most people know when they're telling lies. But the bulk of narcissists, their lies are their truth because of the way that their brain has been wired. So imagine, for example, you take a bump on the head and you no longer see the color yellow, and you understand that the concept of yellow, well, it's never existed. You now see it as green. And your friend pulls up in a Lamborghini and you say to your friend, great wheels you've got there, but funny color you've gone for. Friend goes, what are you talking about? You say, oh, who drives around in a grass green Lambo? And your friend goes, what are you talking about, Ed? This is banana yellow. And you look at him and you say, what are you on about? It's grass green, because you can see it as grass green, because the way that your brain perceives color, yellow is now green. And so you keep saying to it, it's grass green, and you're absolutely adamant, and you're thinking your friend is lying. It's the same for Tate and those other narcissists, that his narcissism makes him see the world differently, and everything passes through this matrix, not the matrix he talks about, but a matrix of control. Is what this person doing giving me control, or are they threatening my control? And if so, his narcissism on his behalf reacts to maintain control or to get that control, although he doesn't realize that is what he's actually doing. So when your throat is dry, that feels uncomfortable for you. That's your body saying, Ed, go and get a drink because you're dehydrated. So your body is in essence looking out for you, because if it didn't do that, you might not remember to hydrate yourself every couple of hours, and therefore you could suffer injury or death. So your body has an inbuilt method of protecting you by making you go and drink. His narcissism is similar. Because he's hypersensitive to the issue of control and he needs to get fuel, You don't need control to the same extent. You don't need fuel. You're not a narcissist. But he has those requirements. His narcissism then has to do something to make him get those requirements. And that means that he's pathologically incapable of seeing that the case against him hasn't dropped. Sorry, isn't proceeding, but has dropped because it suits the narcissism's purposes in that moment to portray it as foundering, so that propels him to then say to people, the reason they're going after me for tax, which, although he doesn't know this, the subtext is that's threatening my control, is because the case in Romania is not succeeding. Therefore, I am able to nullify the threat to control of the case in Romania by saying it's foundering, and I can nullify the threat to control posed by the case in the United Kingdom by saying this is only being brought against me as part of a conspiracy because they can't get me in Romania, i.e., there's no substance to this case. And his narcissism effectively tells him this. He's not hearing a voice, but it causes him to think that way. So he then acts on it. And it's not the case of him standing there and saying, I know they're still pursuing me in Romania, and I know I've not paid my taxes, and therefore they're coming after me in the UK, but I'll say this anyway because it sounds good. That wouldn't be effective. It has to be. So take, for example, if I was coming at you with a sharp stick and I was trying to poke you in the eye, you wouldn't do this. Oh, HG's coming at me with a sharp stick. That could go in my eye and blind me. I don't want that to happen, so I better do something to stop it. I know, I'll push the stick away and move my head up backwards. Because if you thought that, it's too late. I've already jabbed you in the eye. So you have to have an instinctive, instantaneous response, which is, without thinking about it, you bat the stick away, move your head back. His narcissism is similar. It has to instantaneously deal with these threats to control, which means it makes him feel furious about it. How dare they? How dare they do this to me, the mighty Andrew Tate? And cause him to think, this clearly means the case in Romania is falling apart, and that's the only reason they're coming after me with this trumped-up tax charge. And that's what the narcissism does. It makes him feel a particular way and think a particular way in order to go after the prime aims.
That is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Is it fair to say then that narcissists would also create situations purely for gaining control over someone, creating
Absolutely. So this whole thing that you've been covering and exposing, where he's created this method of drawing in women and teaching people about this is how you get hold of them and this is how you should treat them. His narcissism basically says, you need to be able to control an audience. And the way of doing this is to present yourself as some kind of Übermensch that is this brilliant manipulator of women, because this will impress certain individuals. And of course, what he's doing is he will be utilizing what he tends to do in terms of his own interactions with certain women. So, for instance, I've seen before, he talks about where he'd send a message and then he put like a strawberry emoji, so that it would prompt the lady to go strawberry, but then he knows that they're interested. So what his narcissism has done there is basically say to him, you need to get control over this woman, although you're not allowed to know that it's about that. In order to, what we'll say to you is, get her interest, Andrew, and do so by adding a strawberry. And so his narcissism compels him to behave that way, so he controls that woman and gets a response from her, which is fuel. And then his narcissism is essentially said, because you're so brilliant at doing this, Andrew, why don't you monetize this? Because that'll be a residual benefit. Why don't you put this on a bigger scale so that you can control more people, that you can get millions of followers? We, the narcissism, will get lots of fuel by way of all of these people's responses. And we'll get these residual benefits of making millions of dollars. So it's governed by his narcissism. Every single interaction or potential interaction that Andrew Tate has with another human being is governed by his narcissism.
We have chat messages, various chat messages,
yeah,
where the brothers would create these scenarios where the women in their lives would then have to prove their loyalty due to these scenarios that the brothers would create. And in order to prove the loyalty, the answer to proving the loyalty would be, you have to get my name tattooed on your body.
Yeah.
So that fits completely in alignment with what you just said, getting that control over someone.
So that little example you've given there, Ed, is his narcissism works thus. He has no emotional empathy for the woman who's affected by placing his name on her body. Simply doesn't care.
To him. Yeah, she's property to him.
Property, that's right.
Yeah.
There's no boundary recognition. You are like a book that I own that I'm writing my name in on the inside front cover. You're an object to me. He operates with a sense of entitlement. You belong to me, so I can do whatever I want with you. I'm not accountable for my behaviors. So if people think that what I'm telling you is wrong, well, they could go fuck themselves. And again, in order to assert control, his narcissism suggests a method of getting control over this person is to cause them to respond by tattooing your name. And thus, by them doing that, that then signals to his narcissism, this person is under control, and the act itself provides him with fuel. And I've seen some of the chat extract that you've shared. Part of it was about ensuring that the individual would always be contacted or would make contact at a particular time every single day for a week. And then if they fail to do so, the man should respond with, oh, that's a shame. I was going to take you to Dubai for the weekend or such like, and you've failed. So what you're seeing there is repeated reinforcement to control that individual. You must respond at 1:33 p.m. every single day. Thus, I've got control over you. Your response provides fuel. And then if you don't do it, you've threatened the narcissist's need for control. So what I'll then do is effectively use threatened loss, which is, since you didn't do it, you've lost out on something that would have been good, namely a trip to Dubai, so that you will respond begging me or pleading me or saying I'm sorry, which will then show that you're under control and provide me with fuel. So the scheme that he has developed as to teach these individuals how to deal with women is entirely a product of his own narcissism.
He sold a course called the PhD course, which stands for Pimpin' Hose Degree.
Yeah.
And it is exactly what you were just talking about. And they would teach these methods of doing those things like that, right? Requiring them to do certain things every day. Have them do certain things every day, like make 2 coffees at the exact same time every day. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't, they would pull away their attention. And it didn't even matter if you drank the coffees or, you had the coffees or not. They would just, I believe they called it, they referred to the women in some of these chat groups as dogs. Mm-hmm. And it was Pavlovian conditioning, essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
Treat these women like dogs, train them to do specific things. Even if you're not going to drink the coffee, you have to train them to do this. And if they don't do it, you withdraw your attention, you withdraw your emotion and your love and punish them.
And what that's actually doing is, you'll be familiar with the Nigerian 419 scams, where you get a letter from email from a Nigerian prince saying, I've got so much money, and if you send me $20,000, I'll share, X million with you. And often,
are you telling me that's not real? Because I just sent them a whole lot of money.
Oh dear. Well, I'm sure it'll come true, but that's probably the only one that's actually a true one. So don't worry, you're going to be a multimillionaire. I'm sure it'll be all right. Sure, it'll be all right. Now, with those, often they're written in poor English. And so many people look at it and go, well, as if I'd fall for that. It's written in ridiculous English. It's quite clearly sent from somebody who isn't what they are, but it's actually deliberate, because the whole point is they don't want to catch the intelligent people who are likely to see it for what it is or might see it for what it is. They want to catch the people that are susceptible to that kind of thing. So it's deliberately couched in that language so that it weeds out the people who are more likely to pick up on it being a scam and attracts the people who well, if they can't see that the language tells its own story, we're more likely to get success with this individual as a mark for the fraud. And it's similar with Tate. With these behaviors, there'll be many women that would go, well, make 2 coffees a day, always messaging at this time. Get lost. I'm not doing that. So those behaviors are designed to weed those type of people out, so you're not wasting your time on them. And it then puts forward a group of individuals who are much more susceptible to what is to come, namely being manipulated and abused. You don't want the woman who's going to stand up for yourself. So these tactics that they use are done to weed them out so that you don't get the strong, independent woman who can think for herself. Because
they're qualifying tactics.
Exactly. And so similar to the 419 fraudsters, it's done using what in essence seem like rather silly little things, but it's done to weed out the people that are harder to control and then leave you with a rump of individuals which are far easier to manipulate, so that then those are the individuals can be subjected to more unpleasant abuses. They're more likely to take it and not run away from it.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. One of the things that the prosecutor mentions in one of the statements was that they were purposefully looking for women online, because part of the recruitment process was they would use social media apps like Instagram or dating apps, and they would contact these women and lead them into these false relationships to make them believe that they were going to be their boyfriends, etc. Sometimes they believed that they were going to be their wives, and over a period of time, as you would with an online relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecutor mentions that they were particularly looking for young, vulnerable women from broken families, et cetera. So they had a target that they were looking for. So using those techniques, those qualifying techniques, already on specific types of people, they probably have a lot of success with that.
Yeah. So again, many narcissists will focus on individuals who are vulnerable because that makes them easier to control. There are certain people who manipulations don't really work on particularly well, or it takes a lot of effort to manipulate them. So the narcissist doesn't really want those individuals, because the narcissist wants the biggest return on investment. Namely, I want someone that will fountain with fuel, give me lots of character traits and residual benefits for very little effort. So they are searching for those individuals that are most susceptible, which often includes individuals who are from broken backgrounds, because that invariably means that they've probably already been tenderized. It's not always the case that somebody from a broken background will have had a prior involvement with a narcissist, but it's often the case that they have. And what that means is they've become conditioned to be attracted to a narcissist already, although they don't know it. So they chase the storm that existed as a child, as an adult. In effect, the abuse feels like home to them. So they know when someone's being horrible to them, but they find it very hard to walk away from it, because in effect they become addicted to the behavior because they were conditioned to it as a child. And so seeking out women who have been subjected to that behavior in the past makes it far easier to control them in the now.
Let's take this a step further. He has an online school that he's rebranded because it's the real world.
Yeah.
And he targets young men. Some of them, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. And they've changed this quite a bit, as the allegations have piled up. And they're really pushing it now towards trying to teach young men ways to make money through, copywriting, drop shipping, et cetera. Prior to the arrest, they had some of that in there, but Tate said in one of his videos that the goal was to get young men making money so they could save up and join the war room. And then inside the war room is where they would, teach them exploitation to put women into online pornography.
Yeah.
And he repeatedly calls his students losers. And these students online defend him in a method I've never seen before. Would you think, or would you say, in your experience here, that he's attracting these same types of young men who have gone through those same experiences like you just talked about with the women? Like he calls them losers and they keep coming back for more. He verbally abuses them nonstop, and they continue to come back, and they continue to hold him up on a pedestal. How would you explain that situation for the young men?
So of those individuals, the recruits, the acolytes, some of those individuals will be narcissists themselves but won't know it. And this other narcissist, Tate, in calling them a loser, threatens their need for control. So what they do is they fight against that by trying to prove that they're not a loser to him, to win his approval, which in their world signifies subconsciously that he has then come under control. So some of them will be narcissists that when they're told that they're losers, rather than walk away from that, they essentially are driven to reject that, prove it's wrong, and seek the approval of Tate, because then that signifies to the acolytes' narcissism that Tate is under control. Two narcissists can come together and they can both get what they need from one another. It eventually, for many, ends in a tempestuous outcome. But initially, they can both get what they need from one another. I think a large group of the individuals that are drawn are ones, going back to what we said earlier on about those that don't have any guidance. And the fact is that they see Tate as this strong figure, a successful figure who's got millions of dollars, who's successful with women, and think to themselves, well, I want to be like that too. And they probably accept I'm a bit of a loser compared to that, but I don't want to be. So I want to prove myself. So it's born out of pride. Those individuals aren't narcissists, so it's not about control for them, but they'll have that narcissistic trait of pride so that they feel bigger about themselves by being involved with this supposed Ubermensch of Andrew Tate. But they also want to demonstrate that they're no longer loser. And they think, well, yeah, I can understand why I'm labeled a loser, but I don't want to be one. And he's the man. Rather than realize that they're just being insulted and he's using them for his own purposes, they think, well, he's got the answers so that I'm no longer going to reside at Loserville. So I think you get a lot of normal, ordinary young men who are perhaps not that good at critical thinking, perhaps aren't that bright, that are drawn to him because he represents something that they want. And they recognize, well, yeah, I suppose I am a bit of a loser compared to him, and I want to prove that I'm not. So rather than think, oh, you're calling me a loser? Well, I'll just walk away from you. It's no, I want to demonstrate that I'm not one, and I want your help to do so. So I think that there is that, and there will be an element of individuals who have been subjected to poor treatment, who find themselves drawn to such a toxic character as him in the same way that the women are. Yeah. So there's almost like three groups that are drawn to him. Similar narcissists who need the control. The largest group, which will be more normal individuals who don't have guidance, aren't good at critical thinking, don't really realize what are the important things in life, who don't like to be called a loser and think he's the answer, he's the antidote to loserdom. And then there'll be those individuals which have been conditioned to be drawn to such characters and feel that they have to prove that they're not.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You're adding such a different perspective to all of this that's helping me understand it at a much deeper level. So
absolutely.
I greatly appreciate this conversation.
Good. This is why my work on narcissism is so important, because it helps people such as yourself, where you've got a clear interest in the behavior of an individual who's problematic, that you actually understand what drives him, why people interact with him, why he does what he does. A lot of my work, Ed, is about people who've come across a narcissist in their personal life. Often they've been married to one, they've got one in the family, it's a boyfriend or girlfriend, and I help them understand what they're dealing with as part of the creation of my legacy, and they then gain freedom from it. And often those people, having sort of resolved the issue with their personal narcissist, come back to me and they say, now I understand about narcissism, HG. It's enabled me to understand so much about other people that I've interacted with in the past, former romantic relationships, that difficult client that I couldn't appease. It makes me understand why that world leader behaves in the way they do. It's almost like the key has been given to them for understanding so much about life. So it's a very powerful tool, understanding what goes on in a narcissist personality. So I'm pleased that it's turning on light bulbs for you.
Yeah, a lot of light bulbs.
Good. Have you had any interaction with Tate?
Um, so both of the brothers have blocked me, of course, everywhere they can block me. They're 99% of their entire PR team and all of their friends and the accounts that they use for propaganda purposes, they've all blocked me. They have added me to their U.S. lawsuit. They've added my Twitter or my X account, and they're accusing me of being an agent for their alleged victims in the U.S. So they're aware of me. They've added me. They're taking screenshots of things that I post, and they're claiming that I'm defaming them. And I expect a lawsuit before this is all over.
Yeah. Now, understanding what you're learning about his narcissism, again, when you talk about his behaviors and expose them, and you present them in a way which attracts legitimate criticism, you're threatening his need for control over you and the audience. So if he doesn't see what you're stating, it doesn't affect him because it's like you don't exist. But if he becomes aware of what you're writing or saying,
well, they're screenshotting it and putting it in a legal document, so they're aware.
So that threatens his need for control, and his narcissism says we need to squash that threat to control. One way of doing that is to threaten to issue legal proceedings, which is something he does quite regularly. Narcissists often use threat as a tool to get that control. Or, as you found out, he blocked you, which is another assertion of control by withdrawing from you. Now, you might think, well, how can that be control if he's basically run away from me and blocked me? But remember, from his perspective, he is the one that has decided to take that step. Therefore, it gives him the sense of control. He's not actually controlling you, but the narcissist creates an alternative world. So the narcissist has three methods of controlling people. Direct. So, for instance, saying to somebody, oh, would you be a gem and go and get a beer for me? So they use a bit of flattery, and that person says, sure. So that person is under control and gets them a beer. Or get me a beer or I'll kick your teeth in. Use of threat, that person is directly controlled because they don't want their teeth kicked in. But the narcissist can also use smearing somebody or triangulating, which is an indirect assertion of control. So let's say, for example, Andrew Tate is sat there bare-chested in his compound with his brother, and he sees some of your tweets on X. And rather than directly respond to what you're saying about him, he turns to his brother and he says, have you seen this Crayon chap? What a dork, what a loser. And his brother goes, absolutely. You know, he's a beta cuck who's probably just envious of you. Because his brother agrees with him that you're this beta cuck, etc., that gives Tate a subconscious sense of control over you. He's not actually controlling you, but his narcissism takes it that he's got control because somebody else agrees with him that you're basically a worthless individual. So that's the second assertion of control. Or he can withdraw. So, for instance, he could just put the phone down on someone and walk away from them, or stay in a position of withdrawal by basically thinking, so like if he's reading your tweets and there's nobody with him, he could just think to himself, he's a loser, I'll block him. Boom. That withdrawal from you enables him subconsciously to assert control. And the second and third assertion of control are what is known as flectersin aqueous aperos acheronta movibo, which roughly translated means if I can't move heaven, I'll raise hell. If I can't control you in your world, my narcissism allows me a second and third opportunity to control you. So the narcissist always gets that control. So again, it helps you understand why he behaves in the way that he does in relation to the things that you might be saying or doing about him.
Okay, here is a question for you.
Yeah.
It's been said a couple of times by various people that his brother Tristan is essentially Andrew's first victim. Would you believe, or would you think that Andrew, in his behaviors and how he is a narcissist, do you believe that he has created a world where he completely controls his brother, or do you believe they're both narcissists?
I haven't analyzed his brother. I think there's a possibility that his brother might be one also, but it's certainly the case that Andrew has to control his brother, because whether another person is a narcissist, another narcissist, or whether they're normal, or whether they're empathic, or if they're narcissistic but are not a narcissist, they have to be controlled. So whenever that person comes up on that radar, so Andrew sat in the compound on his own, and he's reading a book, perhaps about himself, and he doesn't need to control anybody because he's not engaging with anybody. His brother walks in. His narcissism basically would say this if it had a voice. Non-intimate secondary source has entered the room. It's the brother. Is he under control? Well, he said good morning, which shows that he's under control. Do we need some fuel from him? Yes. So let's now have a conversation with him in a benign fashion to draw fuel from him. In the course of that conversation, Tristan says something which threatens Andrew's need for control. The narcissism goes, red alert, control is being threatened. We now need to use a manipulation against Tristan in order to get him under control again. So he might put him down, or he might flatter him, or he might threaten him. But the fact is, his brother, his chauffeur, his cleaner, his girlfriend, the person that he goes and buys a magazine from in the corner shop, all of them must be controlled by Andrew Tate, because that is the way of the narcissist. So even if his brother is a narcissist, he still has to be controlled.
It's fascinating. And I'm fair to say that that applies to all of his friends as well. Friends, Absolutely. Family, girlfriend, everybody.
Everybody has to be controlled, and he might control them by flattering them. He might control them by threatening them, insulting them, leading them into a circular conversation, bringing up the past and use it against them, bringing up a vulnerability and using it against them, future faking. There's lots and lots of different manipulations that the narcissist will use, and his narcissism essentially chooses an appropriate one in the circumstances to get that control. So if you think about the prime aims, control, fuel, character traits, and residual benefits as the destination, the manipulation is the freeway that takes you there.
One question that a lot of people have is how the Tate brothers are getting people like Patrick Bet-David, Tucker Carlson, etc., to help them push their narrative, especially people like Patrick Bet-David. We understand Candace Owens because her husband is a friend of Tate's, but people like Patrick Bet-David, they're pushing, they're allowing him, they're using their platforms, where they have millions of followers to help Tate push out this false narrative, and in some cases, attack their victims. And we can't find any business relationship there. So in those situations, would you say that Tate would have found various ways to manipulate people like this?
Well, it works. Possibly, it might be that he has something over them, but more usually in these situations, the other individual who's proving a conduit for that person's views has a vested interest themselves, and it suits them to be the platform. So, for instance, there will be some occasions where someone will not agree with that person's views, but they'll have them on their show because lots of people will watch it, and the host cares more about being watched than the actual reputational aspect in relation to who these guests are. So for instance, the likes of Piers Morgan, who he's a narcissist himself, but let's just leave his narcissism out of it for a moment. The individual wants these people on the show because then it means more people will watch. There are, of course, many people that know, for instance, yeah, this person's controversial and we don't like what they say. In fact, I think they're a grade A arsehole. But lots of people want to know what they've got to say. Get them on the program, because those individuals aren't demonstrating any form of responsibility. They're just focused on getting views, getting the viewing figures up, getting advertising revenue. And it's one of the issues that faces society today, is that there is such competition for eyeballs that it's almost a race to the bottom, that rather than try and maintain standards by saying, well, we could launch an expose on that person in relation to their private life, this Premiership footballer, but what impact does that really, the fact that he, likes various women to pop a strap on and go to bed with him with that. What's that really got to do with the fact that he plays football? Hasn't, has it? So we won't run the story because it's irrelevant. But of course, these days, many of the outlets are driven by the necessity of, well, we need to, it's the bottom line. So because more and more people come out with more and more sensationalist material, we've got to join in that race, which becomes a race to the bottom. So similarly with the likes of Tucker Carlson, he might think Tate's an idiot, but he recognizes he's good for viewing figures, get him on. Part of it might be, well, I actually believe part of what he says, so I'm sort of endorsing his message. But a lot of the time with these figures, it's more about they're a useful idiot, that what they spout gets people. It's like you see on social media. You'll see people putting provocative articles. They don't actually believe what they're writing. They just know it'll prompt a reaction. So they engage in this shithousery. They're wind-up merchants because they know that people will immediately go about it and there'll be lots of comments. And rather than exercise some responsibility by thinking, what's the point of posting something inflammatory like that? No, if we post something inflammatory, lots of people will read it, lots of people will comment on it, we get lots of clicks, it increases the advertising revenue. So I think a lot of it's just vested self-interest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How do narcissists deal with prison?
Prison is problematic to an extent for a narcissist. I've actually done some videos about the narcissist in jail, so you might want to watch those on my channel. But it's essentially, the narcissist is still able to control people because there are prison officers, there are other prisoners, there are psychologists, they get visitors. So they won't run out of fuel because they've got people to interact with. There is, of course, an overall threat to their control, which is they are in prison. So the way that they will deal with that is they will invariably complain to anybody who will listen. I'm innocent. The judge didn't like me. My attorney was incompetent. The police framed me, as a means to dealing with that threat to control. So every day when that narcissist wakes up and he's surrounded by those four walls of his cell, that's a threat to control because he can't do what he wants to do. Now, he can't affect that control directly because he can't break out. He can't escape from the prison, although certain narcissists might try to do that as a means of asserting control directly. But ordinarily, the narcissist can't assert control directly by getting out of the prison. So what they then do is the narcissism moves to an alternative method of control, as I was saying earlier, which is I will complain to somebody else about the fact that I'm innocent. They will agree with me that that's outrageous. That then gives the narcissist a subconscious sense of control. So each time his narcissism is reminded of you are in prison, and that's a threat to control, the narcissism then has to do something to nullify that threat to control, which causes the narcissist to bleat about their innocence. Now, if a narcissist is put into solitary confinement, that becomes a much greater problem for the narcissist because fuel levels will drop. And they then, all they can do is keep telling themselves, for instance, that they're innocent. They've not really got anybody to talk to. And in such circumstances, the narcissist fuel level drops, which will create anxiety, which will create this impending sense of doom, like the earth is collapsing beneath them and the walls of their world are crashing in on them. And it can result in the narcissist feeling suicidal. It could result in the narcissist entering some form of psychosis.
Would it be narcissism that drove him to make phone calls in prison, knowing that he was breaking the law? I would assume if you're put in jail, your lawyers are going to tell you that the phone calls are being recorded, right? If you're not having if you're not speaking to your lawyer, the phone calls are being recorded. He would have known that. Do you think it would have been his narcissism that, in his quest for control, that he knew the jail calls were being recorded, and he still tried to bribe Romanian politicians to help him? He still tried to intimidate two of the victims into changing their testimony, knowing that he was being recorded.
In that moment, his narcissism isn't focusing on the fact that he's being recorded. It's focusing on the need to deal with the threat to control. So it focuses on issue the bribe, intimidate the witnesses, almost forgetting that he's being, in essence, forgetting that he's being recorded. This is why certain narcissists like him as in the categorization that he's in, invariably end up getting caught. Because what the narcissism does is it focuses on control in this particular moment, causing the narcissist to do something in this particular moment, which then causes a collateral problem for the narcissist. But the narcissism isn't geared to think about what's coming next. It's geared to think about what's happening now. So take, for example, a narcissist repeatedly turns up late for work. His manager says to him, "You keep turning up late for work. I'm now putting you on a disciplinary." That threatens the narcissist's need for control. This particular narcissist is a rather basic one, what I call a middle lesser. So he punches his manager as a response to that threat to control and puts him on his backside. He's just got control over his manager. The narcissism has done its job. In that moment, it asserted control and nullified the threat to control. Brilliant. We're now into the next moment. The manager says you're fired. He's just lost his job. His narcissism was not thinking, if I punch him, I'll lose my job. It was thinking, punch him because we need control. And so with so many narcissists, Tate included, there's a threat to control in relation to this court case. Therefore, ring this witness and intimidate them, not realizing that this will be used against him because it's being recorded. And that's why so many narcissists are haphazard and end up getting caught out, because they generate further problems for themselves, because the narcissism is focused on control in the now. I often talk about, if you give the narcissist enough rope, they'll hang themselves. And that happens time and time again. And we've seen it with Tate. Previously, as I mentioned earlier, oh, people who pay tax are dorks, I don't pay any tax. Why did he say that? In the moment, to make him look like the big man, to assert control over his audience and draw fuel from them by way of their reaction. Months or years later, that piece of footage comes back to haunt him, because his narcissism, when he was crowing about that, wasn't thinking, whoa, hang on, Andrew, don't say that because that could be used against you in a court case 2 years from now. The narcissism doesn't think about that. Some narcissists, more evolved narcissists, do operate that way, but they're much rarer. He's not one of them. So he will put a tweet out saying, I love to hit women. I don't know what it is about it, but it turns me on. Why? Because he has no emotional empathy, and his narcissism compelled him to write that at the time to try and impress his audience, so they reacted to it. His narcissism wasn't thinking, hang on a minute, that could be used against us later on as evidence against us in some shape or form. The narcissism is focused on what's happening in the moment. And that's why someone like him comes unstuck.
Yeah, that just adds so much clarity to the situation. And I guess it's safe to say he has no impulse control.
That's right. It's an instinctive sort of knee-jerk reaction that he has. Now, he's facing 2 civil and 2 criminal investigations in Romania and the UK.
With a third criminal on the way, with a third criminal case on the way. Yeah.
You've anticipated what I was going to ask. Are there going to be further investigations and prosecutions? So
yes,
there is.
Yeah.
What's the third one?
The third one is it's in Romania. It's for money laundering offenses, additional human trafficking, trafficking in minors, bribery and corruption offenses, influencing statements, which is the witness tampering, where he got caught, on his jail call. Same with the bribery and corruption offenses. That's what we know of. It says and other offenses. So there could be other offenses that are piled on top of that. We're only aware of the ones that I mentioned. And I've also been told that there are a few agencies in the U.S. that have been poking around, asking questions for certain people in the United States. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a case being built in the U.S.
Okay. Of the numerous investigations that have come on foot so far, which one do you think is going to cause him the greatest problem?
I haven't seen any evidence yet for the UK case or the pending case that's coming in Romania that's being built. I have seen a significant amount of evidence summaries for the case that's heading to trial. That's the first case, human trafficking, rape, etc. For human trafficking specifically in Romania, I believe the first case, I believe he's going to be convicted of human trafficking. The problem then becomes it's a domino effect. So if he's convicted for human trafficking in one case, and then he gets convicted for the next case. Well, they're going to say, okay, well, now we have a pattern of behavior. So they can take that first case, a conviction, and they can take that into consideration for sentencing. And then when he finally gets extradited to the UK, if he's convicted there as well, or even during the process, he's been convicted twice of human trafficking. Now he's on trial for a third case of human trafficking. Like, it's a domino effect and it adds up. But I think the first case, I don't like to get into the rape case because there's not a lot of conclusive evidence. It's a he said, she said situation.
Yes.
I know that there's a CCTV camera that does put him at the scene of both allegations, but that doesn't mean that the crime was committed. It just puts him at the scene of the crime.
Okay.
The alleged crime. But for human trafficking, the evidence that I've seen in the first case is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And for your audience, in case they're not aware, most people had this idea of human trafficking, where people need to be kidnapped and chained up to a radiator or smuggled in a shipping container to another country. And while that does happen, the majority of modern day human trafficking for sexual exploitation is built on a man generally using recruiting a woman, trying to deceive the woman or coerce her or manipulate her in some way for the purpose of sexual exploitation. So you have Tate, who was selling courses, teaching his recruitment methods where he would use Instagram, he would recruit them. And he openly said in videos and in endless tweets how he would make women fall in love with him so he could make them work on webcam.
Yeah.
He would talk about getting girls drunk, where he would recruit them, bring them in with the assistance of one of his other girls, would get them drunk and then get them to work on webcam. So I've in my lifetime, I can't recall anyone essentially leaving a video and text crime diary online for the world to see for essentially a decade. He has a decade-long crime diary where he has essentially admitted to everything that he's been charged with. He's talked about how he rips the girls off. He creates fake tax forms so he can steal an extra 20% from any money that some of them would get. Some of the women did not get any money at all. He would take all of their money. And
so
he would just
that type of
brag
behavior,
about it. Yeah.
That type of behavior, the boasting and the bragging that he engages in, is done because of his grandiosity, his sense of invulnerability. And when he issues those boasts, it's done to assert control over people in that moment without due recognition that ultimately he's creating a huge body of evidence which may well convict him. Again, that's his narcissism at work.
All of those old videos, and of course he's went public and said that those videos are not part of the case, but they are. I've seen them. I posted some of them in my timeline from the documents. All the old videos in his course material where he explains his methods of recruitment and exploitation, etc., those are all being used as evidence against him, and they all corroborate the victim statements. They have witness statements as well. They have financial records. They have all of this data. They have chat messages taken directly off of all the defendants' phones, all of the victims' phones, all of the witness phones, where they very clearly detailed exploitation, deception, coercion, violence, threats of violence. His brother Tristan is picking up an additional charge for inciting violence. One of the alleged victims was trying to quit. They threw her out of the house half naked. She went to the police for help. Given that one of their accomplices is an ex-police officer, the police did not believe her and convinced her not to file charges at that time. This happened in 2021. And that victim she was physically abused by their accomplice after Tristan told the accomplices to hit her and throw her out. But the chat messages show one accomplice is telling the other, don't leave a mark, don't bruise her, something along those lines, basically hit her, but don't leave a mark. So what she did was she grabbed her arm, was lifting her arm above her head, trying to rip open her breasts. She just had breast implants, and she was trying to rip open the stitches on her breasts so it wasn't going to show bruises on her face. So there's a really dark element to some of the things that we're doing. And there's testimony to where some of the girls were being blackmailed, where they were going to tell their parents, what they were doing working on OnlyFans if they didn't make content, etc. It's dark, man. It's really dark.
Understandably.
And for
so,
these guys,
That's a manifestation of the absence of emotional empathy to
100%. Yeah.
cause people to behave that way. If he is convicted, Ed, if he is convicted and jailed, do you think that level of exposure will ruin his popularity or actually increase it?
That's a tough question. I've seen a lot of people say things. They've bought into this idea that he's under some sort of a matrix attack. They've bought into this.
Yeah.
And I've seen quite a few people say if he's convicted, that only proves that he's been attacked by the matrix. It proves the stitch up is real. Yeah. They've been led to believe, because he says things like there are no victims and no one knows the victims' names. They don't exist. While at the same time, all 7 victims are named very clearly and identified in their indictment. He knows who they are.
Yeah.
He's suing 2 of them. One of them was actually removed from the case. They were trying to intimidate them. So he's giving all of these falsehoods to the public, and the public is just eating it up. They believe everything that he says. There's no victims. It's false accusations. There are people within DCOT and the Romanian court who are just trying to steal their wealth because they're jealous. They're trying to build a name. They're just putting out all of these stories, and the public unfortunately eats it up. And that's partially why we're putting out the other side to the story, because people are falsely following these guys who may have done, allegedly, some serious damage to some women.
Yes. Now, whilst this is indeed a serious topic, perhaps a bit of levity, when Tate's looking in the mirror, what do you think he says to himself, or what's he thinking?
Well, you're probably going to disagree with me. You're probably going to come at this at a completely different angle that's going to blow my mind.
Well, it's not what I think that he's saying or thinking. I want to know what you're.
I know. Okay, in my experience in life, I'm in my mid-50s. Mm-hmm. Usually the loudest man in the room is the weakest. Mm-hmm. So when he's looking in the mirror, I believe he sees crippling insecurity. Okay. That's what I believe.
That's fair enough.
I would love to hear your thoughts, because he probably looks at himself and sees Superman. I would love to hear what you think he sees. I think he sees crippling insecurity, and he's trying to compensate for that insecurity in every way possible.
It would depend upon the extent to which he is fueled. That if he's well fueled, essentially, he will see Superman. So he will see himself through that distortion field. He will see the all-conquering titan that strides the world like a colossus. If, and this is pretty unlikely for him because he is repeatedly well fueled, were it a moment where his fuel levels would drop, then he would get a momentary glimpse at the insecurities that plague, that lurk beneath, that the narcissism otherwise doesn't allow him to see. So it would depend where he is in terms of the level of fuel. Now, let's move Mr. Tate into the shower now. Don't worry, we're not going there. But bearing in mind that this is a self-absorbed and self-obsessed narcissist, what's the first thing that Andrew Tate washes when he's in the shower?
Oh boy.
I can tell you it's not his hair.
The first thing Andrew Tate would wash in the shower as a narcissist.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's, his chest or his face?
Chest or face, okay. And comes a time when he's going to shuffle off this mortal coil. What do you think his last words will be to the world?
Oh my God. Something that would encompass how great he is.
Yeah.
Or the legacy that he left behind, that he believes he left behind.
Fair enough.
He'll make it about him, whatever it is.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely the case. Now, all that remains for us now, Ed, is to have a game of this or that after you've very kindly shared your views and insight in relation to Andrew Tate. So I'm going to present you with an opportunity.
One moment. What do you believe he washes first?
Oh, that's not for me to answer.
Oh, okay. I
From
didn't know if you were leading somewhere with that. I didn't know if there was.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay.
I have no inside information, nor
Oh,
do I
okay.
wish to have any inside information.
Yeah.
It's just a question I ask my guests about the relevant subject matter,
Yeah.
matter just to see what they have to say.
Yeah, I'd never given any thought to that. I didn't know if we were
No,
going
I'm
down.
sure. I'm sure you haven't.
Yeah.
I'm sure you haven't.
You know, if I would have been quick to answer, that would have been a red flag. I think.
I'm not suggesting that you've got a Tate. I'm not suggesting you've got a Tate cam wired up, so it's quite all right. Yeah. Now, as I was mentioning, we're going to have a quick round of this or that, where I'm going to present you with two choices, and you're not allowed to say neither. There is the proverbial gun to your head, so you have to make a choice. So, here we go: fruit or veg?
Fruit.
Summer or winter?
Winter.
Text message or telephone call?
Ooh. Oh, it depends on the person, but let's just say text message. I'll generalize.
Yep. Driver or passenger?
Driver.
Sapphire or ruby?
Ruby.
Soft or hard?
Soft.
Dusk or dawn?
Dusk.
Unicorn or dragon?
Ooh. Dragon.
Fresh linen or fresh coffee?
Oh, come on. Come on. That's not even fair. Fresh coffee.
Okay.
That's so tough, though. Fresh coffee. Yeah.
James Bond or Jason Bourne?
Oh, James Bond.
Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings?
Oh, just shoot me.
Gotta go with one, I'm afraid.
Lord of the Rings.
Okay. Jam or marmalade?
Jam.
Elf or dwarf?
Ooh. Elf.
Flowers or trees?
Trees.
Scarlett Johansson or Charlize Theron?
I'm sorry, what was the first one?
Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, Scarlett.
Okay. Top Gun or Fast and Furious?
Top Gun.
Tall or short?
Tall.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
Mountain or beach?
Mountain.
Wasps or bees?
Oh, bees.
Sparkling or still?
Sparkling.
Frasier or Seinfeld?
Oh, come on. Frasier.
Homer or Bart?
Homer.
Dogs or cats?
Cats.
Saturday or Sunday?
Sunday.
The book or the film adaptation?
Ooh, boy, that's gonna depend. The book.
Okay. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Peterson
Very
or Tate?
specifically, though, Coke in places like Mexico and Thailand where they use a different sugar. That's a very specific one. Yeah.
Peterson or Tate?
Peterson.
Felt tip pen or crayon?
Crayon.
Just Stop Oil or Black Lives Matter?
Stop Oil or Black Lives Matter. But that's tough. Black Lives Matter.
Okay. No sense of smell or no sense of style?
No sense of smell, no sense of style. No sense of style.
Okay. And finally, you either have to be in a permanent position as Andrew Tate's hair remover, and I mean all hair remover.
You mean as a person who shaves him, or the actual?
Yeah, the person that shaves him. Yeah.
Okay.
The
barber.
Yeah, basically his personal barber for all areas.
Okay.
So you either have to do that, or if you can't stand to do that, you're not allowed to pass any more commentary on him.
For the sake of the mission, I would shave Andrew Tate.
There you are. What a warrior you are. What a true warrior you are.
That's going to end up a soundbite shared around. I know it, but for the sake of the mission, yeah.
I'd shave Andrew Tate. Yes, you might come to regret saying that.
I started something, and listen, I don't want, I would rather not do this. You know, this isn't something I wake up and I want to do every day, but I've started something, my son is involved, and I feel like I have to see it through at least until the first case ends.
Understood.
You know, I don't want to show my son that I start something and then walk away from it because it becomes troublesome or too difficult.
Yes, I understood. Well, Ed of Murdered by Crayons, thank you very much for your company today, and thank you for sharing your insights in relation to Andrew Tate.
HG, that was a wonderful conversation. You've given me so much to think about and a different perspective that I'm going to be reflecting on this conversation and playing it back and taking notes probably for the next few weeks after you publish it. So I thank you. Yeah, this is a fantastic conversation.
You're welcome.